Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of Philosophic Perspectives on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Past shows are archived. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. And now here's your host, Mr. Arthur D. Schwartz.
Why, hello, everybody. Nice to be with you once again. Tonight we're going to talk about the meaning of moral courage. The meaning of moral courage. Now, that's a pretty heavy one, huh? But the thing about that is, to me, that encapsulates the importance of theoretical philosophy, you might want to say. And I say that because, most, ethics, the world gets along, and we have disagreements, and we have agreements, and, but when you get to certain conundrums, when you get to certain issues that seem intractable, and the thing is, we have rules, and we have maxims, and we have generalizations, and let's face it, they all just break down in those situations. Whether it's personal issues or whether it's world issues, we all, I'm not actually, some of the few big ones, on personal level, let's say the abortion issue is, there's two sides, and it seems like it's unreconcilable or irreconcilable. You have political difficulties now. Of course, the Arab-Israeli crisis, which has been going on through, the entire lifetime of probably everyone listening to the show. There's so many things that happen, and to me, that's really when philosophy can do its most good. Unfortunately, more often than not, what happens is the opposite, because the basis of rules, and everyone has their own rules, for example, but they don't necessarily agree with each other, then it breaks down. So then you have ideology and dogma, and so the conflict and the difference becomes intractable because you got your ideology, I got my ideology, and we're never going to fix. We're never going to. It's going to end in violence because there's no other way to resolve the conflict except other than violence. Might makes right if you stay within these narrow confines of rigid, orthodox, dogmatic thinking. And I actually think that just simple rules are the foundation of that tendency, because rules like tell the truth and keep your promises, those are beautiful. Of course we need to live by them, but as everyone really knows, they're not absolute. Because first of all, what if you make a promise? What if you make a promise to somebody, and then you're walking down the street, and you meet somebody else and know that you were just talking to somebody and wants to know what you're talking about, and you promise that person you wouldn't say anything, and so you'd lie, because if you tell the truth, you're breaking your promise. If you break your promise and you lie, you're telling a lie. So they could conflict, and that just illustrates why those why principles aren't the bedrock of morality. They're watchtowers. They're guideposts, as Nietzsche said. They're generalizations, and they work fine. And you should always tell the truth until, of course, you can. Why is that? Because there's something deeper and more essential than simply telling the truth. I think you should always tell the truth, all things considered. You should always keep your promises, all things considered. But are you trying to tell me that there are no exceptions? You can't. There are exceptions. And why? Because there's something deeper than those generalizations. Well, that little talk I just gave So it indicates the difference between moral actuality and ethical formality. So ethical formality, which is the second chapter of my book, is about rules, or is about generalizations, is about sort of, the things that work and are pragmatic, but it doesn't really point to something deeper. Now, moral actuality is something that is deeper because it's a situation that you believe is moral or not, is good or not. And sometimes the rules, you won't get there with the rules. You have a situation, it's right, it's working, everything is happy, everyone is happy, and there may not be any particular rules to define it. It's just because it evolves over a period of time, over a period of history, and it's a good thing. You didn't get there by following just simple rules. That was part of it, but it's deeper than that. So that's what I would call moral actuality. An actuality is basically a deep, abiding belief. An actuality is the world as we accept it to be. Now, an actuality can ultimately be wrong too, but it's very, very deep, so we live by it every day, and once in a blue moon, the world gets all shaken up, and we decide that the actuality now was wrong. That can happen, but that's very rare. We feel very confident in our actualities, the actuality of certain fundamental principles of a relationship, certain fundamental principles of a government, certain fundamental principles of science, certain fundamental principles of truth about the world, that the sun will rise tomorrow, and so forth and so on. Those are actualities. Now, that's distinct from reality, a little bit distinct, because reality actually is what we think absolutely is the case. The only thing is, in my view, and I think the view of many others, that's beyond the human ability to understand. So when you say something is real or reality, it's sort of a difference to that's reality, but it's kind of beyond words because we just saying that's the case. So I'm getting a little bit off the track. I am going to read, I think, at least one of those sections of my book on the subject of courage, because I know that what I just started saying, you might be thinking, well, what's the tie-in with courage? Because courage has to do with something that moral courage has something to do that gives you the strength to overcome what might be unorthodox or orthodox. Sometimes, the courage is just to toe the line and to do what is traditionally done, even though people want to do it differently. And sometimes it's actually to kind of break new ground. See, that's just the whole thing about it. We cannot rely on, these little simple maxims and these little simple truths and these little simple rules of behavior, which are fine and dandy. We couldn't live without them. All I'm saying is there are existential situations that define our moral strength. I would say our moral toughness. We have tensions. We have conventionality and unconventionality, conservative and progressive, multiple perspectives. I talk about plural perspectivism, which is an eager seeking out of perspectives just to challenge our beliefs. There's a lot of tension, and those tensions cannot be resolved in simple knee-jerk thinking. Simple knee-jerk thinking is not going to do it. Now, I think a one way of looking at this is to compare moral courage with bravery, or just courage with bravery. Because, you see, that's when it all comes to a crux. Moral courage is when you have to take a stand and you don't have the comfort of simply knowing you just have to do what you're told, like the Ten Commandments or some rigid principle is do that. I'm not criticizing the Ten Commandments. I'm just talking about rules in general. Bravery is a lesser thing. And so on that point, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read that little section, because rather than just trying to articulate it, I can, this is very nicely, I think, stated, and it's only 2 pages, not even. It's 2.9 in my book, Ethical Empowerment, Virtue Beyond the Paradigms. Courage. Courage and bravery should always imply moral courage. Risking one's life in the performance of a heinous act can hardly be called virtuous. Hence, it is not an exemplification of courage. The 9/11 hijackers certainly gave their lives in carrying out heinous crimes, but it would be wrong-headed for anyone who considers their acts to be villainous to also consider them to be acts of courage. We simply would not describe someone who dies in the process of building a bomb intended to blow up a train as having died courageously. Rather, we would most likely describe the explosion as a product of hatred that ultimately consumed the perpetrator. Acts of hatred are not courageous. There are deranged or misguided or confused acts performed without regard to one's own safety. But those qualities hardly possess the virtue of courage. Courage is a virtue, and as such, it is a harmonic act of ethical intention and action. If courage is a moral predicate, then it is incorrect to knowingly use the term to denote an act done with bad intention or without moral purpose. As an example, my dear, this diamond necklace is such a lovely gift. But if the gift was acquired by means of burglary and at gunpoint, there is nothing lovely about it. Discounting intentionality in the use of approbatory language is done at a cost. Accordingly, the use of courage is here presupposed to be an affirmative ethical usage, which, like any ethical affirmation, may be arguable on ethical grounds. Toe the party line. Stay true to your own opinions. Don't waver. Don't rock the boat. While towing the party line may require considerable toughness, it does not necessarily involve moral toughness. And courage always involves moral toughness. By moral toughness, I refer to the intellectual courage that often involves discarding formerly held beliefs in favor of new ones, or holding on to old beliefs, but in the light of ethical conviction that is more than knee-jerk formality. Moral toughness requires flexibility, openness, and receptivity to new ideas as much as possessing the capacity to hold onto old beliefs. Merely standing behind your party or standing up for your beliefs or coming forward in favor of change are not acts of courage if they are done without self-examination and justification of motives and potential consequences. Each new belief is in the process of becoming old from the moment of its adoption. And so ethical judgments are always subject to re-examination and of weighing on the opinion of others. True courage reflects wholehearted decision and action that incorporates genuine ethical reflection. Certainly, the virtue of heroism may require spontaneous action when a moment's delay could be catastrophic. But if there is time to reflect upon the rightness of an action, would-be heroes are not exempt. Blind allegiance to group identities or to a herd mentality, while not intrinsically wrong, is fertile ground for individual weakness. Contrary to Nietzsche's view that democracy is only a form of decay, namely the diminution of man, making him mediocre and lowering his value. Democracy also has the potential to produce both the greatest and most morally high or most morally tough individuals. Popular culture is not intrinsically shallow, but it often is. Let me repeat that one. Popular culture is not intrinsically shallow, but it often is. Radical and impulsive swings in popular culture can be an influence that retards and stymies the intellectual and moral development of individuals. Democracy can drag society in a direction of the lowest common denominator, but it can also inspire greatness. Nietzsche fails to see the complementarity of democratic pluralism to his own perspectivism. If Nietzschean overcoming of obstacles and barriers is essential to the development of greatness, then it would seem that the negative and regressive influences of democratic culture and the challenges that they represent can be the very hurdles that spur individuals to great achievement. The most fertile ground for greatness is the diversity of a pluralistic democratic culture where battles for great ideas are won and not merely bred. We live in a critical period of history because it is feared that scientific and technological knowledge may be outpacing our ethical, intellectual, and political development. Our age requires morally tough individuals who not only have the courage of their convictions, but who are also willing to break conventions to solve difficult problems. But weakness also creates opportunities for the overcoming of oneself. I repeat that. But weakness also creates opportunities for the overcoming of oneself. Did you know that acknowledging error is a high virtue for overcoming weakness and to which everyone can aspire? Generally, greatness is the child of courage. That completes a small chapter. Actually, the next chapter is greatness. So I would lead in. But of course, greatness clearly is closely related to the subject of courage. So the thing about the reason, just to try to connect the dots, I started off talking about ethical formality and moral actuality, and oppositional tensions, conventional, unconventional, conservative, progressive, multiple perspectives of all kinds of things. And that shows, in my view, that the nature of moral actuality, which is, in my view, what we try to strive for, is to do something that ultimately will have be viewed either by oneself or in consensus with others. What is morally right? What is morally good? What is morally beneficial? And the way you're not going to get there just by following simple rules, because it can be very cruel that way. That's called rigidness. That's called you can be uncompassionate. all kinds of crazy things happen because when you have little rules, the rules themselves are not intelligent. They're generalizations and they generally work, but sometimes they don't. And when situations become very, very complex, they often do not. In fact, they never do completely. That's why we have to get into a deeper comprehension of what really constitutes moral actuality. Now, moral actuality. I'll talk again about my principal theory in the book is on the basis of morality is centered on loving intention. And so I feel that our decisions must be guided by loving intention. But what does that actually mean, philosophically speaking? So I say that the components of love. I mean, this is just my definition of it. I mean, you can change it, but this is the way it comes down for me. There are three dualisms, and they are fairness, beneficence, and compassion. So what's a dualism? It's self-regarding and other-regarding. So fairness to oneself, fairness to others. It's two, right? So there's actually six. Three dualisms, but six oppositional poles. Fairness to oneself, fairness to others. Beneficence, doing good. Beneficence to oneself, being beneficent towards others and society and so forth. Compassion. Compassion is generally thought of compassion for others. But no, it's also very, very important to have compassion for oneself. In fact, I would argue that the failure to have compassion for oneself is a contributor to psychological depression, but also sociological depression. In fact, I think a lot of the troubles around the world are based upon a kind of lack of compassion for oneself, beating yourself up, and maybe feeling sorry for yourself. That sounds a little bit like something that Nietzsche called resentment. That would be leading me astray, but I realize in saying that it sounds a little bit like resentment. But so I feel that the morality based upon loving intention has to look at those six poles or three dualisms. Each dualism has two poles, right? Self-regarding, other, and others. So, and then the poles have a range of where it would come down. Now, this is not a hard rule like tell the truth or whatever. These are guides. So that here's the thing. So my view is, if every time there's a major disagreement, and so if you make a conscious effort to get the other person's point of view, and the other person does the same, and then you try to get the point of view from about yourself. How does it benefit you, or what's the impact on you? Same thing for another person. And when you look at it in terms of not only yourselves, but also look at the consequences, because another factor is intentionality and effectuality. You might say cause and effect. It's a little different, but basically the same thing. So in other words, you have to factor in, okay, what are intentions pure? Did we really go through it, and are our intentions right? And then what are the consequences? One of my favorite old sayings is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So it's very important to have good intentions and to be able to, I've created kind of like an architecture, you might say, or the anatomy of love. And so you have fairness, beneficence, and compassion, and then you break it down again in terms of your intentionality and your effectuality. You have to look at all these things. But let's face it, you can have the best intentions. You can go through this dialectical interchange, or I should say dialogical interchange, within yourself and reflections and with others and consensus and all that, and still the whole thing can just blow up. The whole thing can just blow up. It just doesn't work. That's right. It might happen because we're fallible. That doesn't mean you don't try. I think ethics is really like anything else. It's a skill. You get more adept at it. And And so, some people are better at gauging consequences. I mean, consequences arguably are more important. Utilitarians feel that way. I actually put the greatest emphasis on intention. I mean, they're both extremely important. I mean, that's the thing. You have to have both. But the reason I put the emphasis on intention is because, hold on, I just closed the door a little bit here. I'm actually in a different place than I normally am. Okay. And the reason is, if you act from good intention, someone who is the victim or feeling the brunt of the bad decision will probably have more acceptance of the fact that even though it was a lousy decision, there was no harm intended. That might be idealistic, but I really do believe if something is really done with good intention, if you do things in good intention and you mess up, you also have more of an ability to say, we were wrong, let's get it right. You see what I'm trying to say? Rather than dogmatically, what usually happens, and people don't apologize, people don't say they're wrong, and so they just, never say they're wrong, never say they're sorry, and we get nowhere. If you have this dialogical kind of consensus making and individual reflection, using the 6 poles and also adding in intention and effectuality, and when you make mistakes, I mean, I think you don't have so much ego involved. Once you get used to intentionally trying to escape the ego, because once again, when you're trying to go self-regarding, other-regarding, when you're trying to always go beyond the self to see the other point of view, as well as taking care of yourself as well, because that's probably equally important. It's easier to say, you know what, I was wrong, let's redo this. It becomes more possible. What we have now is no. There is just so much darn ego involved. We see it in politics, incredibly in politics, but just in everyday, life, people just, don't want to say they're wrong. And that is not being able to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, or, is probably what may be the single greatest weakness in humanity. Because if you can just get beyond that, I think a lot of progress can be made towards creating the world we all dream about. Or maybe not all of us, but many of us do. Okay, so on that note, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
This is Arthur D. Schwartz. Beliefs and disbeliefs can be very powerful. Much like philosophy, hypnotism is concerned with belief. Hypnotherapy, a practical application of hypnotism, may largely be described as the practice of removing false beliefs that form mental blocks to success, to happiness, and to well-being. In my hypnotherapy and philosophical counseling practice, I combine my work in philosophy with hypnotism in order to clear mental blockages that can occur on both conscious and subconscious levels. A mental block may be conscious or subconscious and can be expressed, for example, in the form of anxiety, low self-esteem or low motivation, bad habits, tobacco habits, weight gain, low performance, and much more. If you are interested in using hypnosis and the power of the mind to overcome mental blocks and barriers that have emerged in your life, please feel free to give me a call at 617-964-4800 or visit www.integralhypnosis.com. That's INTEGRAL hypnosis.com.
In Ethical Empowerment, Virtue Beyond the Paradigms, Arthur D. Schwartz presents an ethical theory that is a framework for evaluating moral conundrums that go beyond legalistic rulemaking, dogmatism, and preconditioned thinking. The book is as much an ethical framework for unconventional ideas as it is for staying with convention. Ethical Empowerment is a manifesto of non-doctrinaire perspective. Ultimately, the hypnotic thinking of ideology and dogmatism can only be overcome by returning to the true source and essence of morality, which is nothing less than universal love. Discover how the philosophically liberating approach of the ethical empowerment can be applied to the range of ethical, social, and political controversy. Read about a plan to eliminate all political parties. Entertain the possibility of an overhaul of the patent system and its replacement with a system that rewards inventors while eliminating monopolistic control of patents and technological suppression. Many other transformative ideas are discussed in the book, including issues related to the monetary system, real estate, scientific paradigms, and a rational approach to conspiracy theory. While ethical empowerment will challenge your mind to consider new perspectives, the ethical challenge is always to keep the diversity, depth, and breadth of perspective within the boundaries of love. Ethical Empowerment is available at Amazon.com and most online booksellers in both print and e-book editions. Thanks for joining us on Philosophic Perspectives and being a hip, intelligent listener. Past shows are archived. You can pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. Now back to your host, Arthur D. Schwartz.
Why, welcome back. Speaking about intelligent listeners and all that, I forgot to mention, Scott, that I really feel honored following, following Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor. That was really an honor.
How many stations can get Arnold Schwarzenegger to do commercials for them?
Very few. And when he gets on, he's terminating everybody, right? Yeah.
Go to chopper. I don't even know what that.
The president. What's that?
Go to chopper. I don't even know what that means.
I know. But the president, of course, thinks he's doing a terrible. Arnold was doing a terrible job. Remember, so the ratings are down, and he takes great pride. And I think maybe Arnold did have a good come on. He said, well, he's willing to change jobs. And he said, did you see that clip last week?
No, I did not. I'm a news junkie. I missed that. Well, change jobs.
Oh, yeah. So Arnold said, he said, well, you're so very good at the ratings thing. So why don't we just switch jobs?
I did see that.
I'll do your job, and then and we can sleep again.
which I thought was a great. Which what Arnold said. Yeah, it's okay. Trade me jobs, you moron.
Yeah, right.
I think they left out the moron part.
I would do it. I mean, I don't know if I normally would have voted for Arnold. I certainly would. I certainly do a swap. Be okay with me. Okay, so I won't talk about Trump. I mean, I already did, but I won't persist because that's a whole, that's all I've been doing. But I want to talk about, this is an interesting subject for me, the differentiation between courage and bravery. See, because courage is a moral word, in my view. You can't courageously be a suicide bomber. You can't courageously be a bank robber. I mean, that's ridiculous. Courage, in addition to being brave, it's morally coherent. It's laudable. Bravery, however, I think you can, because bravery just says you're willing to risk your life, or you're willing to risk getting arrested or whatever, or getting injured or whatever the case might be, or losing a whole bunch of money because it was it's greed. It could be pure greed. It could be just a stupid. It could be just some kind of a business that the guy's making a lot of money. But the thing is, it's brave if he's willing to risk like his life savings, right? I would call that brave. You could also call it stupid, possibly, right? But I would not call it courageous. Now, here's another word that has the same kind of dynamic of requiring a moral connotation to it for it to work, in my view. And again, by the way, I understand you might find cases where the word is used this way, but I think generally what I'm saying is quite correct. Now, here's another word, leader, and great leader. So I remember a few years ago in one of my discussion groups, I got into arguments with a few people. I did discussions, and like, for example, Hitler was a great leader. Now, just to say that, it's sort of like, what are you talking about? Well, so they're trying to say, well, great because, he's a historical figure and he did big things. So therefore great. But the thing is, that's not the case. You could say Abraham Lincoln was a great leader. Hitler? Now, you can say he was a great despot. He was a great mass murderer. He was a great dictator. So they're using great attached, because great is now is being attached to a moral predicate, a negative moral predicate. Great despot, great fiend, great murderer. The word great is modifying that. But when you just say great leader, I don't accept the fact that Stalin was a great leader. No, he wasn't. He was a great master. He was a great. He orchestrated a great massacre. He was a great despot, dictator, cruel. He had great cruelty, not a great leader. I really, to me, that's a big issue, and I don't really know why. I realize it's just a semantic thing, but maybe not, because maybe people say that there is a little envy in bad people who do great things. There I go again. Bad people who do things of, historically significant proportions, but are evil. So when you talk about great leader, it's a lot like talking about courage. The courage of his convictions. A great leader might have great courage. A great leader might also be brave. Now, brave, I think, is more neutral because, like I said, there's no disconnect about saying that someone you think is an extremely bad person, that he or she can show bravery in risking his or her life. Yeah, that's neutral. The fact is, risking their life because they were trying to, blow up a building. So, they were great. They're courageous. Come on, they were brave, however, right? That's neutral. It doesn't have any moral connotation. I don't think, in my view. I guess bravery too is also has a very kind of brilliance about it, in terms of the word. It's just that I don't think it rubs against the grain of morality. I just think it's not affected that way. That courage has to do with courage to do something extremely laudatory and worthwhile. Okay, now today, so that's. Let me just go over again. Now, we talked about ethical formality and moral actuality. Talked about the three elements of morality, which is fairness, beneficence, and passion. We talked about all these tensions, self and other, conventionality, unconventionality, conservative, progressive, multiple perspectives, and courage and bravery. And courage is one of those things that you want just to get a sense of what it is. Now, here's the thing that's just coming to my mind. How do you do that? Well, yes, I have come up with a scheme of this 3 elements of fairness, beneficence, and compassion, and intentionality and effectuality, and all these oppositional things, self and other, and you mediate all of them, and by so doing, you can, it's easier to find consensus and recognize mistake and so forth, and so on. But just almost lost my thought. But I also deal in the book on the subject of, for lack of a better word right now, let's call it meditation. Because I do believe that another way of being able to comprehend, what is really the right thing. Sometimes we need to transcend language and all the garble. Once again, it's like I said, it's all the words, all the rules, all of this, all of that. Sometimes they get in the way. We need them; they're vital, absolutely. But sometimes we need to shed them, and so that's why certain mystical approaches and meditative approaches can clear the mind, and so that's an assistant into getting to that place where we can make that decision. So I did one of the chapters or sections. It's section 2, number 47. So it's just right near the end of the book. It's called Ritual and Reverie. And maybe I'll read a little bit about that, because that actually was my attempt to talk about different meditative techniques so that we can get a kind of, we can approach these things and make it easier to escape the stranglehold of just too many freaking words. I mean, that's an old idea. I mean, there's something called Wittgenstein's ladder, and that talks about escaping words. I think Plato did the same. Let me see if I can read this. How many pages is it? Well, it's actually only it's too long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. I won't read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read a little bit of it. I'll skip around. Okay, it's Ritual and Reverie. And let me just make sure I'm at the time. Gotta look at it. Oh, boy, time is flying. Wow. I'll start, and maybe I'll continue when we come back. I'll just read for a few minutes here. Ritual and Reverie. It is not uncommon for hard-nosed scientists to be regular churchgoers and practitioners of their respective faiths. To their credit, these scientists do not allow science to get in the way of their faith. As Emerson crisply and insightfully observes, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. The truth is not easily packaged. In the reconciliation of the seeming incommensurability of scientific objectivity with religious ritual and faith is both an inspiration and a symbol of faith itself. In contrast, so-called free thinking, which basically means atheists, is not any freer than any other type of thinking. Free thinking pretentiously inverts the notion of freedom so as to exclude other forms of thinking. Free thinkers hold that nothing is worthy of belief except the doctrines of evidence. Let me read that again. Free thinkers hold that nothing is worthy of belief except the doctrines and evidence of science, science, science. They are generally self-described skeptics whose core belief system is that skepticism is the only valid belief system, excepting, of course, atheism, naturalism, moral relativism, and, of course, science. Right. Free thinkers, you think you are free, but you are perhaps more enslaved to dogma than most other ideologues. To be precise, free thinking is an absolutism. Thinking holds the potential to set us free. But freedom is relative to the size of the intellectual pond in which we swim. Slaves to science or to atheism swim in ponds that arguably are not much bigger than the ponds in which religionists do their swimming. If you don't believe in the conventional wisdom of the current state of scientific knowledge, then some of your beliefs may be easily dismissed, if not derided, as pseudoscience and without value. Freedom does indeed require a rational basis if it is to resist excessive bias, but which pond will produce greater freedom, the local swimming pond or the great oceans of the world? The inlet to the ocean of freedom is not a closed mind, but rather a multi-perspectival attitude of plural perspectivism that encourages a good faith effort to overcome the limitations of our thinking. In that way, we are made relatively freer. Spiritual thinkers, free thinkers, and all of us self-described thinkers must overcome our own thinking, and the only way to do that is to muster the courage of self-examination and scrutiny by exposing ourselves to a plethora of perspectives. And so I am not really castigating free thinking any more than any other preconditioned and preconceptualized forms of thinking. But the pretension of the word thinking makes free thinkers an easy target. So I get into some of the meditative stuff, and we'll do that when we get back. So we're going to take another break now. And Scott, I always jumped right in there. I can just wait and talk because I almost did it again. But I think he's got the time now. So we'll take another break.
This is Arthur D. Schwartz, host of Philosophic Perspectives on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Are you an author, filmmaker, inventor, creative artist, or thinker? Would you like to present and promote your work on my radio show? I will be hosting small roundtable discussions on many intellectually stimulating and inspiring topics. The discussions will be an opportunity for you to share and promote your work. If you are interested, here is all that you need to do. Join creativityexpo.org. It's totally free. Then, after you join, post basic information about yourself on the Presenters Registry, which may be found by clicking the Discussions tab located on the menu bar at the top of the page. To summarize, if you are an author, filmmaker, inventor, or artist, and are interested in participating in discussion groups on the Philosophic Perspectives radio show, go now to creativityexpo.org and sign up with the group. That's creativityexpo.org. creativityexpo.org. Click on the Discussions tab and post a little information about yourself and the work that you do. That's it, folks. It's really that easy. I will send you a confirmation message after I receive your posting. For more information, please email me at radio@arthurdschwartz.com. Philosophic Perspectives is broadcast live on the ArtistFirst Radio Network on the first and third Wednesday of each month, 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Pacific Time. Find the link to the Philosophic Perspectives show page by visiting ArtistFirst.com.
You are listening to Philosophic Perspectives on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Let's get back to your host, Mr. Arthur D. Schwartz.
Welcome back. So I hope you listened to that little commercial. That's just, I think it's a nice time right now because it's about the Creativity Expo, and I'm making some progress in that area in terms of getting presenters to, and also now coming on the show too. So it's looking better, and we'll get some people together to do shows as well as presentations in the Boston area. Now, that does come into play here because I think there's really a strong link between creativity and spirituality, and of course, the show here again is called The Meaning of Courage. Well. What I'm arguing for in terms of courage is a kind of creativity. Because if you escape, very mechanical kinds of rules and make everything black and white, like everything is like a legal decision, it's very not particularly creative. And I think morale, or rather ethics, which is the way we go about navigating morality, is best when it's done creatively. That's just the whole thing. I think there's a creative element that is generally lost. And so this is a convergence of creativity. And so I had that ad, and I guess I knew why I put it in there at this time, because I think I knew it subconsciously, but now it's coming to me because I actually talked about this in my introduction of the book, that there is a kind, ethics doesn't have to be boring. It should be inspiring. And while there is certainly the do's and don'ts, obviously I'm certainly not saying that it's not, but there's also a lot of creativity, because it takes creativity to achieve greatness. And that greatness comes in many guises, and one is the guise of a flourishing, rich, ethically thriving community. So that's why it's relevant here. So now I'm going to get right back into this this chapter, and we'll just get right to this point. Intense focus on spiritual or ritual practice in prayer may very well reap a spiritual empowerment that in authentic plural perspectivism cannot ignore. Once again, plural perspectivism is my term for an eager embrace of differing perspectives than your own, and doesn't have to accept them, but it challenges your beliefs and for the better. Buddhism has been described as an atheistic or non-theistic because it does not posit a deity. However, there is a distinction between God and divinity, and Buddhism can very well be described as an expression of sacred divinity that is nonetheless atheistic. Some atheists consider themselves spiritual and are comfortable with the mood of some forms of Buddhism, although I think that this is less the case for self-described free thinkers. Some forms of Buddhism posit metaphysical principles such as the intermediate Bardo states of reality in Tibetan Buddhism that would not likely be supported by a free thinker who claims to be bounded by a purely empirical, scientifically grounded reasoning. I'm going to skip a little bit here. So here's the point I put in here, a little joke here. I need a little ritual in my life. My plural perspectivism needs it. So does my soul, and I will work to overcome this deficiency. As is the case with the I-Ching, there are parallels between the three basic ethical dualisms in the Kabbalistic tree, a tree of life. The Kabbalistic tree of life, as is generally depicted, features three basic dualisms and its corresponding 6 poles called the Sephirot. But there are also an additional 4 Sephirot configured along the central column or path. A total of 22 columns or paths interconnect the 10 Sephirot. The tree of life represents the energy flow of the universe that enters into the uppermost Sephirah on the tree of life called the crown or Keter and descends to lower levels of Sephirot. The driving tension in the Kabbalistic tree of life, however, consists of the dualistic separations from the non-duality that is Keter, which is the pure and indescribable emanation of Ein Sof, or God. The tensions between the dualistic oppositions must overcome in order to attain greater consciousness so that a return to the unity or singularity of Keter, the highest level of human consciousness, is attainable. A consciousness of Keter may be compared to Kundalini consciousness and its complete unblocking of the Kundalini energy in yogic practice and meditation. Higher consciousness in Kabbalah is achievable by reconciling or repairing to Kun, called the dualistic separation from Keter in meditation and ethical practice. As in other mystical and theoretical practices, a higher consciousness is achieved by harmonic balancing. With respect to the ethical principles discussed in this book, meditation can be a helpful tool in reflections that seek moral coherence and equipoise. That's something that I won't go into here. For example, exploring the myriad permutations of the basic ethical dualisms configured to the 64 I-Ching hexagrams can help clarify a multitude of ethical perspectives in terms of intentionality, effectuality, and the influence of convergent factors. While I am not interested in making an excessive connection with meditation and the principles advanced in this book, I would like to suggest that meditation rituals can become powerful adjuncts to any creative enterprise, including the art of living an ethical life. So there you have it. How I believe that meditation, I talked about the Kabbalah, the I-Ching, Kundalini Yoga, in this little section. There's still another page to go. I won't read it. But if anyone is interested, this chapter is section, or part 2, section 47, 2.47, ritual and reverie. And so that's it. That's pretty much what I was trying to do here. Once again, I want to summarize, because to me, courage is about this transcendence. It's about understanding a depth on a deep level, the moral imperative that will allow you to risk your life or to lose your money or put yourself in grave danger because you know why? Because if you have nothing you're willing to die for, there's nothing you're willing to live for. And so that courage is a moral bravery, not just any kind of bravery that just risks life, because you can be doing that for evil. And that's the thing. And, I think we have to accept that, So some people just like to have blinders, and not, see the truth that there's lots of things there's lots of elements of bad things that are truly bad, but the elements themselves, the aspects, can be appreciated even though they're distorted and vile. And that's hard to think, but that's, we need to be objective. I had this conversation with someone recently. I mean, I think I read the Nazis were very advanced in their environmentalists. Yeah, the Nazis, they advanced in environmentalism, way ahead of us at the time. So you can't say that. Well, no, that doesn't take away from the fact that they were absolute killers and the most vile human beings who ever existed, or at least no one more vile. And so that's just the way, that's the objective reality. There's sometimes good mixed together with a lot of rotten stuff, like the bad apple. The bad apple might ruin the pudding, so it's a bad pudding. So I'm not making any sense. It's been a long night. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me once again. Once again, also, I always want to give appreciation to Scott. He does a great job, and I really appreciate it. And so this does conclude tonight's broadcast. Either my next show or the show thereafter, I will be having a guest. And like I said, my goal is to have more guests moving forward. So for links to my book, Ethical Empowerment, my philosophical counseling and hypnotherapy practice, and the Social Advisors Club, please visit arthurdschwartz.com. I want to also add, please visit creativityexpo.org as well. And this is Arthur D. Schwartz reminding you to live well and think deeply. So until next time, good night, everybody.